looking at this whole situation. Trump is saying the US troops are leaving Syria very soon.
Yeah, he came out with that the other day.
Although how long very soon? That can be a long time, can't it? An American troops are among the dead in Syria bombing. This is an IED in Syria. Also, the French are to send special forces to Manbij, this city. And Mattis is saying the US has nearly attacked the Russians in Syria again last week.
Well, the Russians were saying exactly that. I mean, they were expecting a false flag chemical weapons attack in Syria, which would then lead to an air assault on their forces in Syria. And they were saying, if you know, because they've been taking quite a lot of punishment in so-called accidental strikes on their forces, and said if that happens again, we're going to sink the ships where the planes are where the missiles are fired from. So we got right to the edge here. Very close to the edge.
Has that got anything to do with this Skripal business?
Well, I think it has. I mean, you've got to see all this as. I mean, if there was actually, I actually glanced at this. This document that's been produced by the British to justify their position, and it's got a pattern of Russian evil, and it's got all these various so-called steps that the Russians have taken, with the Skripal case as the sort of final straw that broke the camel's back. But most of it is frankly made up. Totally made up. I mean, there's no coverage in the West of this court case in Kiev, where it's been proven to the satisfaction of a court that the sniper fire that killed the 80 demonstrators and police officers at the beginning of the Maidan crisis was carried out by Western special forces, orchestrated by NATO. That all came out in a court case in Kiev.
Well, this meanwhile, Her Majesty's government. This is the document. We'll put a link up to it on our show page. It's called the Salisbury Incident, and it was issued by the British Embassy in Moscow on the 22nd of March. It does a kind of timeline of that particular incident, but the thing you're referring to is the slide 4, which talks about a long pattern of Russian malign activity. Now, let's just run through some of this. November 2006, the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko.
Well, I mean, Litvinenko to my mind, was probably assassinated by Berezovsky as part of a pattern of trying to.
And even the British inquiry said it was only probably the Russians that did that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got to. Most people who don't follow this presume that it's getting too complicated. I mean, it seems straightforward.
Okay, Martin, we need to have some just quick answers from you. May 2007, a denial of service attack disables Estonia's internet.
I just don't believe that happened. I mean, that's the sort of thing I'd say to that. Well, why would the Russians want to do that? What good would it do?
It's easy, actually, to mask a DDoS.
Well, it is, and we know that the CIA can do. The CIA can mask it. Yeah, that's quite right. They can do it and then claim it's the Russians.
August 2008, the invasion of Georgia.
Well, what happened there is that the Georgians attacked the enclaves which were protected by the Russian army, and then they kicked them out
during the opening ceremony of the Chinese Olympics.
Yes, that's right. And it was the Georgians. They got loads of Israeli personnel in there and British military personnel, etc. And they mounted an unprovoked attack on Ossetia and Abkhazia. And the Russians were ready for them and gave them a kicking. That's what happened there.
The February 2014 occupation of Crimea and the destabilisation of Ukraine.
Well, that all came from the original Maidan protests, where we now have court evidence from a court in Kiev that the shootings were carried out by NATO special forces, specifically mercenaries from Georgia.
Okay, then the 17th of July 2014, MH17 was shot down, killing all 283
Well, as BBC Russia pointed out at the time, they had eyewitness reports on the ground saying that the plane was shot down by an aircraft from Kiev. And that was put up on BBC Russia in Russian and then taken down. But that's prima facie evidence of that.
Who's the fascist leader in Sloboda and of the Maidan protests. He was the chair of the National Security Council at the time that plane was shot down. And 2 weeks later, without any explanation, he was forced to resign.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what we're seeing is the British government dredging all this stuff up shows that they haven't actually got any evidence on Skripal.
We haven't got to the end of it yet.
No, I know. It's a frog of nonsense.
June 2015 to November 2016, interference in the US elections.
Well, I think all the evidence suggests that the interference there was no interference by the Russians. The WikiLeaks leak about the emails showing that the Democratic primary had been rigged against Bernie Sanders came from WikiLeaks and not from Russia at all.
In May 2015, the Russians attacked the Bundestag, hacked into the Bundestag.
Well, the Russians would say, no, we didn't. And, of course, as you pointed out, it's quite possible for these cyber attacks to be faked as if they're from the Russians. Why would the Russians want to do something silly like that? What was the goal?
Well, they want to know what the Germans are up to, so they're going to hack in, aren't they?
Well, if they're going to hack in, you hack in quietly. You don't leave a fingerprint saying we've hacked into your computers.
I think with all these hacking things, it's almost impossible to prove who's done it.
Well, exactly.
That's the problem here. January 2016, the Lisa case, disinformation against Germany.
Well, I don't even know this case, but
okay,
I mean, this is scraping the bottom of the barrel.
OK, Martin, we'll leave that one. The 2015 to 2016, the Danish Defence Ministry hack. We'll leave that one. It's another hack that can't be proved. October 2016, a coup attempt in Montenegro.
Well, that's in fact the coup attempt was from the other side. I mean, there's a lot of interference going on in former Yugoslav politics.
Well,
by the
we
West.
Actually met when I was on holiday there. The nephew of the pro-independence presidential candidate, who was saying that we shouldn't either be aligned with NATO or Russia, and he was actually arrested on the middle of the day of the election day by the police, and is still on trial apparently. Now that is the police destabilising the election.
So that's supposedly a coup attempt where the opposition candidate, who as opposed to Montenegro being part of NATO, is arrested in the election campaign and accused of carrying out a coup. In actual fact, it's a coup by NATO against Montenegro.
And then, of course, finally, March 2018, an attempted assassination of Sergei and Yulia Skripal.
Well, it's. I think it's game, set and match, isn't it? We've got to go to war with Russia now. What else can we do?
Well, what do you make of this? Because the news has come out that Skripal had actually tried to contact Putin and said he was fed up with living in Britain and he wanted to go back. Now, MI6 wouldn't necessarily have liked that, would they?
No, well, I would imagine that somebody like Skripal... I mean, people have got to get their heads around the idea that MI6 is not some kind of wonderful organisation that's out there protecting us from terrorism.
Full of James Bonds.
Yeah, but it is full of James Bonds, and you know that the Operation James Bond, Operation JB in World War II was the operation to spring Martin Bormann from Berlin, and of course Ian Fleming was involved in that, which is why he called his hero James Bond. As can be, if people look at our archive, you'll find what that story's all about. MI6 is actually a very devious and ruthless organisation.
Well, we heard originally that
compared to do all sorts of evil things.
With Novichok was nerve gas. That was the original. But apparently it turns out, and it's funny because I was joking with a friend earlier this week saying, well, this nerve agent could be anything. It could be jam. And he laughed. But actually it turns out apparently it was gel smeared onto his door handle.
Yeah, it's funny that the police have taken so long to find that after, it's only 20 days later, and it still doesn't prove anything. I mean, when they went to court to get the blood samples from the victims, they had to submit a court document that says it was caused by Novichok or some similar agent. And that is because they haven't proved that it's Novichok, whatever Novichok is, or that it's related to the Russians. And that was leaked to Craig Murray, the former US ambassador, British ambassador in Uzbekistan.
The Russians have pointed out, and I'll point out that these nerve agents are incredibly toxic. It might take you weeks and weeks to die of it, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to survive.
Well, if they
we also had, remember, 45 soldiers and sailors down at Porton Down, just 10 minutes drive away from Salisbury, who died as a result of having been basically used as guinea pigs in Porton Down. And they were given this, paltry 3 million compensation about 10 years ago, the families for that. Can we trust Porton Down?
Can we trust the British government full stop? And the answer is no, because they're committed and dedicated to this whole psychological warfare trope that elections and the truth are all secondary to winning this war that they claim to be fighting. But of course it means that they are liars and are shown to be liars, and in a court of law their evidence would not be accepted on the basis that they've lied so often before.
Well, let's have a little look at this thing called Operation Beluga now, and this is a recording that was done with a former French GIGN officer. Can you just tell us who GIGN are?
Well, as I understand, they're the anti-terrorist police in France.
And he's retired, and his name is Paul Barrell. But he's got some quite interesting things to say about what he believes is a concerted attempt by the US through the CIA and the British through MI6, through our taxpayers' money, to destabilise the Russian secret state within Russia, and also to get rid of Putin.
Captain Barrell, you've said that you are going to make a statement about the unknown facts concerning the death of Alexander Litvinenko. Why did you decide to speak now? Because I think that now it is necessary to reveal the truth. After the death of Litvinenko, so many lies were told by journalists, but above all, by the secret services. I especially want to make this clear. For America and Britain, the Cold War has not ended. The struggle continues. And in the Litvinenko case, we are talking about an operation to destabilize the Russian leadership, particularly President Putin, to seriously damage the reputation and credibility of the internal security forces. This manipulation operation is coordinated by the CIA and MI6 and all the enemies of Russia. France is also involved in this, backing up the Americans. You see that the Mistral was not delivered, that a financial investigation was initiated against Putin's inner circle. All of this is being done in order to destabilize Russia and cast a shadow on Putin's policies. This applies to Ukraine, but above all to Syria. This secret operation of the Americans and the British, does it have a code name? The code name for this operation, which was assigned by the CIA, is Beluga. So this is the code name that was given by the Americans to this secret operation. This operation is like a painting, a watercolor, where each stroke, every touch of the brush has its own color. But in general, the whole picture has the same goal, to discredit and destabilize President Putin. It is necessary to clarify that I am a resident of London. I live there most of the time. I know London. In London live about 300,000 Russians, including a Chechen community. All Putin's opponents are in London. For example, Bill Browder.
The audience can make their own mind up about the credibility of that.
Is that true? All Putin's opponents are in London?
Well, yeah, that's the obvious place for them to go, isn't it? That's where...
They sort of follow Berezovsky.
Yeah, and they follow Berezovsky. And that's why we've got all the Islamists of the world in Britain, because we were the lead agency on Operation Cyclone in the 1980s. In fact, virtually every criminal enterprise in the world has its headquarters in our blessed little island, Tony.
What about the suicide of Berezovsky?
Well, it wasn't accepted as suicide by the coroner in Buckinghamshire. They said that they left an open verdict, and of course the Russians weren't accused of killing him. It was just left as an open verdict, and I suspect Berezovsky was topped by his own side, by MI6, because Berezovsky kept pushing this idea: we've got to get Putin for bombing Moscow. We've got to get Putin for bombing Moscow, because of course we're talking about the Moscow apartment bombings of 9/99.
Let's just have a look here, because both polonium and Novichok are supposedly mainly produced by the Russians. So what you're saying is that these potentially have both been used in the Litvinenko death and this attack on Sergei Skripal to make it look like the Russians have done it. Surely that's too complex.
No, it's not. It's not too complicated. You've got to look at things. This is basically a strategy of tension. What's going on here is the population, in fact, haven't got any beef with the Russians. They don't like them or dislike them. They don't have really much feeling about them at all. So they've got to be made to feel that Russia is a threat, an enemy, and this, that, and the other, which is what this is all about. And eventually, people who are not really paying attention find themselves going along with all of this because they simply can't think of anything else to do. And that's the purpose of it. And of course, it's very dangerous because the Russians are very well aware of what's happening. They know that they're being set up. And if they were less level-headed, we'd already be in a full-on shooting war with them.
Berezovsky died in 2013. That's just about 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago. Let's have a listen to what Paul Burrell had to say about this, about the Berezovsky death, because he actually was working quite closely with him.
I knew Mr. Berezovsky well. I had long conversations with him. I was at Gainsborough when he had his Chechen friends there. Berezovsky was not a man who could commit suicide. His fortune was not zero. He still had about $250 to $500 million. Mr. Berezovsky became dangerous. He talked too much. He took drugs that made him uncontrollable. If I understand correctly, he had become uncontrollable. He chatted right and left. The picture we saw of his death, that he hanged himself in the bathroom with a scarf, does not correspond to reality. That is, he was killed. Yes, he was assassinated. It was professional.
But not by the Russians.
Well, okay, so why would let's try and dig down into this a little bit. Why would MI6 or MI5 or maybe private companies or private interests, the royal family, etc., because we know the Queen's cousin was also close to Berezovsky, he's a fluent Russian speaker as well. So what would be the motive there?
Well, you've got to...
I mean, he was talking very much... That's one of the things he said there. He was talking to the press all the time.
Yeah, the problem with Berezovsky, he wanted to be president of Russia, and he and Putin worked together in the era of the bombings of Moscow.
He wanted to be the power behind the scenes.
Yeah, he wanted to be the power behind the scenes with Putin as his puppet, and Putin wasn't going to be his puppet. And then, of course, Berezovsky fled to the west.
Did he come to London? Because
he fled to the west. This is the
place where this idea of having power behind the scenes has been mastered.
Basically, Putin kicked him out after they worked together to keep Zyuganov out in the 1996 presidential election.
Well, he was involved in the Aeroflot case, Berezovsky, and the privatisation of Aeroflot.
Well, I mean, he was a leading oligarch theft. What do you call it? Thief. But and he was the chief, and of course Anatoly Chubais, who's still in Russia, was also heavily involved in all of this rip-off. And Berezovsky and Putin fell out. Berezovsky comes to the West, and of course he wants Putin removed. And he's, that's in line with Western policy because Putin's starting to wander off the park. They originally thought of him as somebody who was going to be useful to them, and of course he's turned out to have his own ideas and all the rest of it. So Berezovsky kept pushing. I mean, the book by Litvinenko, which nobody talks about, but the actual book was called Blowing Up Russia. And in that book, Litvinenko says, we know that Putin was involved in the bombings of the Moscow apartment blocks because I was involved in it, and so was Berezovsky. We were all involved in it. So why don't we accuse Putin of being involved in it? Now, if you can't see what's wrong with that, you can see these people are not going to be, they're actually stupid. You can't use it in that kind of way. And eventually he carried on banging on about why don't we use this against Putin? And of course you can't, because MI6 and the CIA were also involved in that terrorist attack, as they were in many others around the world, including the 9/11 attacks, which took place subsequently after the 9/99 attacks in Moscow.
BCFM.
Martin, we're going to talk now about something completely different, which is Cambridge Analytica. Let's have a listen now to what the Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday.